Okay, all right. Good afternoon and welcome to the second Saturday seminar series. I'm Susan Jones. I'm here at the Animas Museum along with Charles D. Ferdinando, and we'd like to thank you for joining us today. Now, on this day, February 10th, in 1874, 150 years ago, La Plata County was established. We're celebrating today. I know there's a big group downstairs and cake in the research library, so make sure you get some cake. And if you're not here, swing on by this afternoon if you can, and hopefully there's some cake left. And we've also got a new pop-up exhibit about the history of La Plata County in the entryway. So today, Charlie and I are going to talk about what was going on 150 years ago. It's a complicated story, and this certainly isn't the end of it. Today, we're just going to look at what happened leading up to 1874. We plan on offering more talks and exhibits as we hit different milestones in the next couple years, leading up to the 150th anniversary of Colorado statehood, of the Animas City, of the smaller La Plata County, a whole bunch of things that are coming up in 2026, let alone the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. But before we get started, this is a big day. As usual, some quick Zoom housekeeping. We apologize. Our video guy is on vacation this week, so we're only on Zoom. We're using Zoom's webinar feature, which means that you're all muted and your videos are off. And at the bottom of your screen, you might need to mouse down to see it. There are little icons. To minimize distractions today, we've disabled the chat function. If you have an immediate issue or question, please click on the Q&A icon and we'll be monitoring that. At the end of the talk, we'll open up for questions online. You can either type them into the Q&A and we'll answer them, or you can click the little hand and we'll allow you to unmute and ask your questions. But if you're in the classroom today, please hold your questions. Once we handle all the online questions, we'll shut down the webinar. We'll go downstairs and we'll answer any questions in person. And for those of you only online, we'll write down the questions that we get and the answers, and we'll post them in the show notes tomorrow. So you won't miss anything. This session is being recorded, and you will receive an email in 24 hours with a link to the recording and any other links that we talk about. And actually, the recording will probably be on our website, animasmuseum.org, under the events page later this afternoon. So here we go. Now, first of all, here at the Animas Museum, we recognize that the land we inhabit and the rivers that run through it are home to the ancestral Pueblo peoples and the Moache, Caputa, and Winachu bands of the Ute people. Because 150 years ago, this was Ute territory. The land we now call La Plata County was home to the Nuche, or the Utes. Primarily 3 of the 7 bands, that the ones I mentioned, the Weminuche, Capote, and Moache, traverse this land. They would spend winters in the southern part of their territory, which is kind of modern northern New Mexico. And then in the spring, they would travel up north along the rivers into the mountains and that we call the San Juans to hunt in the summers. They lived in teepees or wickiups, like you see here, that were perfect for their migratory lifestyle. The Utes traded and negotiated extensively with other tribes for what they needed beyond what their lifestyle could provide them. And they worked with other tribes and allowed them to use their lands for hunting. Now, this image in our collection was taken outside of Ignacio by a member of the Aspis family. The Spanish ventured into the area, of course, looking for gold, silver, and routes west. In 1765, Juan Antonio Maria de Rivera was sent by the governor Cachupin, in Santa Fe to explore what is now southwest Colorado, looking for silver. His party named several of our local rivers, including the Piedra, the Pine or the Pinos, the Florida, and of course the Animas River. And as a sidebar, Juan Rivera never called it the Animas Perditas, but that is a whole other story. That came way later in the 1880s. Juan Rivera and his party also left behind the names we now know for the mountains, like the San Juans or St. John Mountains and the La Platas or Silver Mountains. Rivera's search for silver was not very successful. However, there are many tales of artifacts that were left behind by the Spanish in their mining quests. Then in 1776, two Franciscan friars, Dominguez and Escalante, came through this area too. They were looking for a route from Santa Fe to the newly established missions in what is now California, like Monterey or some of those other missions. With them was a talented cartographer named Bernardo de Miera y Pacheco, who drew the map that we see here. Um, and if you look closely, you can even see that, and we have a copy of this map in the exhibit, the La Plata name from which the county gets its name much later. And the Animas River runs right through it, and all the other rivers that we mentioned. Now, the Spanish traded extensively with the Utes, who exchanged the shiny rocks they found to the Spanish for the one thing that the Utes really needed, and that was horses. Um, the horses really made the the Ute lifestyle so much more efficient and easy because they were going north and south all year long. There's not a lot we know about what happened when the Spanish were here. A lot of the problem is many of the records of colonial Spain and Mexico were destroyed at the end of the Mexican-American War in 1848, but the legends persisted. Then, when in 1849, just after the end of the war, there was a great gold rush to California, and everybody kind of ignored Colorado except for the Utes. They had their home and their land to themselves. Now, in late 1858, gold was discovered on the banks of Cherry Creek in today's Denver. And by 1859, the Pikes Peak bust rush was in full swing. Some became rich, many others busted. One of those who busted was a prospector named Charles Baker. Now, you might be familiar with the story of the Baker Party. Charles Baker had been prospecting up in California, so he kind of knew what to look for. He led a party of prospectors into the San Juans looking for gold in 1860. Maybe he'd heard some of the rumors of what the Spanish had done. We're not sure, but they came in. They were looking for placer deposits, which means gold that had eroded off the rocks into the rivers and streams of the area. And they did find some placer gold at the mouths of what became Cunningham Gulch and Mason Gulch, which later was known as Arastra Gulch. The Baker Party did not understand at that time that most of the precious metals in the San Juans were embedded deep in the veins in the mountains left behind by the volcanic activity. But in October of 1860, Baker convinced perhaps 150 other people to try their luck in what became known as Baker's Park, not realizing the severity of the winter. As it started snowing, that first party split up. One group went south along the Animas River and settled a little town they called Animas City, which is just south of the snow line even today, and about 12 miles north of the later Animas City, where the museum is located. Now, the prospectors planned on going back to Baker's Park to complete their claims in the spring of 1861. They did, but they didn't find enough placer gold to justify the backbreaking labor of finding it. And the Utes were not real happy with their presence and were becoming more and more hostile to the trespassers. And then when the Civil War broke out in April of 1861, the party left that summer, leaving behind the promise of riches in this difficult mountainous area. These photos are kind of fun. They were taken during a reenactment. It's supposed to be the arrival of the Baker Party. It was 70 years later on June 8th, 1930. There was a pageant written and directed by one of the local Durango teachers, and it was quite a big deal, as you can see from some of these pictures. The main photo of Baker's Bridge, which is still there and became infamous much later when the movie Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid was filmed up there. But this version of Baker's Bridge was taken by the USGS survey that came through here in 1897. So, Colorado became a territory on February 28th, 1861, primarily as a result of the influx of white immigrants during the Pikes Peak Gold Rush. William Gilpin was the very first territorial governor. And the territorial government quickly designated several counties, as you see right here in this slide. But as the Civil War was ramping up, the mountainous lands in the western part of the new territory were really not well known or surveyed. Much of western Colorado was dumped into one big county. They and they initiated it on November 1st, 1861, and they called it Guadalupe, but they spelled it wrong, as Guadaloupe. Maybe somebody recognized their spelling error because just 6 days later, the county name was changed to Conejos, which means rabbit in Spanish. And this is what the map looked like at the time. Kind of as an aside and a plug, we did have a webinar this summer with historian John Steinley, who wrote a book on Colorado's part in the Civil War, and it is posted on our website, and you can check that out to learn more about Colorado and the Civil War. So we're a territory now. And as the war was over, people started coming back in. And remember, the Ute territory originally encompassed pretty much all of what's now known as Colorado and beyond. In 1863, during the war, a treaty was signed at Conejos, the town in Conejos County, with the Tabawatch Indian Utes. And Ouray, a lot of people talk about Ouray, the great Ute leader, was from the Tabawatch band. And that treaty allowed for mining and settlement on the east part of the Continental Divide. Now, once the war was over, the Utes didn't stand a chance against the lure of gold, silver, and other precious metals. And the government realized that there was going to be trouble. So in 1868, the US government sent a delegation to Washington, D.C., which included Territorial Governor Alexander Hunt, who is, this picture is was taken by Matthew Brady when the group was in Washington, D.C., and it only shows part of the group. Alexander Hunt is the gentleman, the third from the right, with his hand in his jacket. And he later on was very instrumental in the development of Durango, but that's long time later. Other members of this party included Kit Carson and Lafayette Head, who were prime movers and shakers in Colorado. Ouray was there, as there were delegates from 6 other Ute bands. But still, the U.S. government didn't really understand that Ouray could not speak for all of the tribes. He really could only speak for his band. But they went ahead and negotiated a treaty with him and the 6 other bands that gave the Utes a 16.5 million acre reservation in the western third of Colorado in return for annuities. That was food and supplies. And most notably, this 1868 treaty specified that non-natives could not enter, reside in, or cross the reservation. This next picture really shows how much territory the Utes lost. In the upper left, let's see if we can get the pointer working up here. This is the original Ute territory. So as you see, Colorado, Utah, into what's now northern New Mexico, Arizona, and with hunting grounds going beyond that, was the original territory. But then in 1868, we're cut down to this. And it still sounds like a lot of land, but a lot less than it was. So, and then over the years, other treaties have cut that land down further and further. Up here, we show, we're going to talk about the Bruneau Agreement here in a minute, what happened when the Bruneau Agreement was signed in 1873, which was so much a part of how La Plata County came to be. And then even later, which this is kind of what we have today, where the Southern Utes are just right along the border, the Ute Mountain Utes to the west, and the Uinta and Ouray are in Utah. So you can really see what happened over the years with those treaties. So even though people aren't supposed to be in here, or non-native people aren't supposed to be here, prospectors started trickling into the high country in the late 1860s and early 1870s, even though they were not supposed to be there. Adna French, Miles Johnson, and Dempsey Reese are three of the names that's in particular that came in. They knew about the placer gold that the Baker party had seen in the Animas below Cunningham and Arastra Gulch. And here you can see this is a map from Eric Twitty's book, Basins of Silver, which is absolutely wonderful if you really want to understand the mining history of this district. So here's Arastra Gulch over here, and Cunningham Gulch is over here, and there's the Animas River. So they came in here panning for gold in the Animas, but or the Baker party had, but now we're several years later, and Reese uh, and these guys knew that the placer gold was just weathered away from the veins underground, which the Baker party didn't understand. So what they started doing was prospecting around in the river by water methods. And then when they found some placer gold, they'd go a little bit further, maybe north. And if there wasn't any placer gold, they've realized that the veins would be right next to the river. So they started looking for those. They staked the very first hard rock claim in the Animas drainage, maybe even in the whole San Juans up here in Cunningham Gulch. Now, this first vein, they kind of looked at it pretty quickly, and it didn't have too much gold in it. It appeared to have more silver in it. And today we associate the San Juans and Silverton with silver, of course. But at this point, gold was worth about $20.67 an ounce in 1870s money, but silver was only worth $1.29, and silver was a whole lot harder to process in the field. So the prospectors kind of left that claim and they moved on. Then they headed up Mason Gulch, which was later called Arastra Gulch, up in here. And they followed the placer deposits in the drainage until they found the vein. This vein became the Little Giant. And all of this was happening in September of 1870. The Little Giant had a lot of gold in it. They made their claim. They were all excited, but they knew that winter was coming. So they headed south to make plans over the winter to develop the Little Giant. They looked for investors, and they brought in a couple, and some names include William Mulholland and Thomas Blair. And they raised money by selling stock in the Little Giant mine. So with that money, they headed back in the spring of 1871, and they built an arastra. An arastra is basically a big circle that you'd put the ore in, and you would take maybe a draft animal to walk around the circle pulling heavy beams that grind the ore into sand. And from that, you can retrieve the gold with mercury pretty easily. So that was the first mill in the San Juans, and the gulch became named Arastra Gulch instead of Mason Gulch after that. Well, word got out about the Little Giant, and more prospectors headed in, including some other names you might recognize: George Howard, Charles Jones. And by about the end of the season, and we're talking 1871, there are probably 40 to 50 prospectors working the Little Giant area. It was the only profitable mine at the time. They headed out for the winter, and they came back in 1872, still trespassing. And this next year, there were probably over 150 people prospecting up in the Gulch. That year, with the money that they raised, they brought in a stamp mill, which is kind of incredible when you think about it. All the things that they had to bring over Stony Pass, they hauled that in. They started really ramping up production, and the Utes watched and were not happy. So this is kind of here's where the Little Giant was. The camp was in here. The mine was up here. And if you've hiked up in this area, oh my gosh, you know how difficult it is to get in here. And you also know probably that the Silver Lake really became a huge mine much later on. So it all started right around here. So um, these are pictures of the mines of the Little Giant mine and the mills that were being built up there. So what was going on is that responding to Ute complaints, the federal government tried to expel all of those prospectors at the Little Giant by March 1st, 1873. And they wanted the army to enforce that order. A man named a general, A.J. Alexander, created a camp over to the east on the Rio Grande, kind of on the way in between Del Norte and Stony Pass. It was called Camp Loma, and they tried to guard entry into the Ute reservation for that spring season in 1873. It didn't work. The prospectors complained. So they lifted the order, especially because a man named Felix Bruneau heard the complaints of the miners, and he thought he might be able to negotiate a new treaty with the Utes that would keep the Utes happy and make the miners happy at the same time. And we're going to talk more about that later. So that order was lifted, and the prospectors flooded in. In June, the Army sent Lieutenant Ernest Ruffner in to document the illegal mines and settlements. And these are some of the pictures that he took from on that documentation. Probably some of the first photographs taken in the San Juans. The photographer was a man named Thomas Hine, who accompanied Ruffner. And probably, although the people in the picture are not identified, it's probably some of the names that we've already been talking about. So this is kind of a picture of what early La Plata County and what we're talking about, kind of a very rough map. Del Norte is a town over here where everybody was coming in along the Rio Grande, and they'd come up over Stony Pass through the north. Eventually, George Howard built a cabin. There were kind of two main areas up here where people were encroaching and trespassing. Around the Little Giant Mine in Arrastra Gulch, there was Bullion City was one camp that was there. Howardsville was another camp, and Eureka was up there as well. Then also, people started coming in from further south. And let me go to the next slide. This is a picture of old Howardsville, and thanks to our friends and colleagues at the San Juan County, Colorado Historical Society. This is a picture of Howardsville. It was as it looked pretty early on. It was pretty rough. And then further south in the Animas Valley, farmers and ranchers were settling here and created a settlement called Hermosa, which of course is Spanish for beautiful. Now, this background picture was taken much later, but this scene would not have been unusual at all. There were a lot of hungry people up there in Baker's Park around the Little Giant, but nothing would really grow up there. Um, this gentleman is inset in here is Robert Dwyer. He was the first to homestead, albeit illegally, in 1873 down on Junction Creek in what became Animas City and eventually became Durango. Now, Robert Dwyer could be the topic of a whole other webinar. He was born in Ireland. He emigrated to Canada with his mother after his father died. Then his mother died, and he made his way to Minnesota. He was in Denver in 1872 when he heard about the excitement going on in the San Juan, so he headed out to try his hand at it. He worked at the Little Giant, so he was one of those people working up there in 1873. But he really didn't like the cold. He had some health issues. So looking for a more temperate climate, he came and established his ranch in October 1873 at the confluence of Junction Creek and the Animas River. And as we'll learn, the Bruneau Agreement was negotiated but not ratified at that time. So he was kind of a illegal squatter. But much later, he became the county sheriff and Durango's first city marshal, and but he was a part of that first group in the county's development. And on over to the west, what's going on? I'll let Charlie pick up that story.
Good afternoon, everybody. This picture is of John Moss, the infamous or notorious John Moss. What's interesting is that, again, you could do a whole webinar about John Moss, and we've had some past webinars when we've talked more about him. But he plays a role in developing mining in what is now the western part of La Plata County. But he's not really the guy that made any discoveries. He was sort of a promoter, and the people who were really credited with making the first discoveries in the La Plata Mountains were four miners or prospectors. Their names were Almerian Root, Alex K. Fleming, Robert Jones, and Henry Leitner. We don't know a lot about how they came into the La Plata Mountains, but they were there in 1873, and they located what became known as the Comstock Mine on the La Plata River at the base of the La Plata Mountains. The problem for them in 1873 is they were almost destitute, and they needed some investors to help them develop this claim. So after they made this discovery, they hightailed it back east over the Continental Divide to Del Norte, which was the next population center to the east. It was the jumping off point for the San Juan Mountains. And they started looking for anybody that would show some interest in helping them develop their claim on the La Plata River. And it just happened to be that John Moss was sitting in a saloon, heard their story, his ears perked up, and he convinced them to bring him back over the mountains and show him their claim over in the La Plata Mountains. They collected some samples and then headed, John Moss and one of them headed west to San Francisco, because John Moss was under the employment of the Parrott brothers of San Francisco, who were in the banking business in San Francisco, and they were looking for um, uh, mining interests that they could invest in Colorado, and John Moss was their front man. So I mentioned one of the people I mentioned in those first four prospectors. There's a man by the name of Alex K. Fleming. Keep that name in mind because his name is going to pop up a little bit later. So they gather up some samples. They head to San Francisco. John Moss convinces the Parrott brothers that there's money to be made in the La Platas. And so the Parrott brothers agree to fund them and so forth. So they then head back. They head east from San Francisco and come back to the La Platas. So anyway, at the same time in 1872 and 1873, the federal government had sent the Hayden survey into this part of Colorado to do a U.S. geological survey because so little was known about this area. And just by chance, one of the members of the Hayden survey party was William Henry Jackson, who was to become one of the leading early photographers of the West, but he was the official photographer for the Hayden survey. So they're poking around in the San Juan Mountains, and they start hearing about what was going on over in the La Plata Mountains. So at some point, William Henry Jackson makes his way down to the La Plata River and meets up with John Moss, who takes him around and tells him about Indian ruins in the Four Corners area and so forth. So this piques William Henry Jackson's interest, but winter is starting to set in, and so the Hayden survey party, they sort of retreat for the winter, but William Henry Jackson makes plans to return in the spring of 1874. Because of the funding from the Parrott brothers, in 1873, John Moss and some of the people that returned with him did lay out a new town site, and they named it after the Parrott brothers. But really, there was not any development of the town until the next year. And so when William Henry Jackson came through, there were some tents and rudimentary structures there. And Parrott City really doesn't get established until 1875. But anyway, that's a whole nother story. Let's go to the next slide. This is an early view of Parrott City over in La Plata Canyon at the base of the mouth of La Plata Canyon. And this picture is probably during its heyday. There are very few pictures of Parrott City, but there was only like 3 streets in the whole town. There were several 2-story structures, but most of the structures were very rudimentary, small log buildings. There were a few large frame buildings. In 1875, a man by the name of William Valiant brought a sawmill in and set it up near the present site of Hesperus on the La Plata River, and he supplied lumber and mill work for most of the structures that were constructed in Parrott City in 1875. Let's go to the next slide. Here's another picture that was taken in early day Parrott City. The gentlemen pictured there, of course, were prospectors. You can see they've got their burro there loaded with their equipment and so forth. This photograph is really part of a stereo slide that was taken by William Henry Jackson. And of course, you can see a pretty fancy frame building there in the background. So it wasn't all just simple log cabins, but to the left of these gentlemen, you can see a tent structure that has a wooden base and then a canvas roof and sides. So things were still pretty rudimentary, but we're getting ahead of the story here. Let's go to the next slide. So again, this map shows this area of southwest Colorado, and the green line there delineates what would be known or taken away from the Ute people. It was the area of the Bruneau Agreement. So anyway, you can see there that it includes the high San Juan Mountains, the area up around the Little Giant Mine, up near the headwaters of the Animas River, and it runs south to within about 15 miles of the New Mexico border. Let's go to the next slide. Okay. Here we've got two important gentlemen. On the left is Felix Bruneau. He was on the Indian Commission in Washington, D.C. He is described as being a rich philanthropist from Philadelphia. And he was involved in negotiating numerous treaties and agreements with different native groups in the West. Now, one thing that's important to mention here is this agreement that was reached. We call it the Bruneau Agreement. It's not the Bruneau Treaty, because in 1871, Congress passed legislation that no longer recognized native groups as sovereign nations. And you can only negotiate a treaty with a sovereign nation. So any agreement between the government and Indian tribes after 1871 are referred to as agreements. So the gentleman on the right side, of course, is Chief Ouray, who again was, the government recognized him as to be the leader of all Utes. Well, he was not, but he ended up sort of being appointed spokesman, and he and Felix Bruneau developed a fairly good relationship. Felix Bruneau, again, for the times, he thought he was looking out for the best interest of Indian people. But again, when we look at it through our eyes today, it doesn't look that way. But Chief Ouray had lost a son who was kidnapped, and Felix Bruneau, as part of these negotiations, tried to convince Chief Ouray that he could find his lost son and return him to him. So they developed a much closer relationship because of that. Unfortunately, Felix Bruneau was not able to live up to his end of the bargain. So in 1873, Felix Bruneau comes out here to Colorado and starts negotiations with the leadership of the Ute, the different bands of the Ute people. And again, if you want to know the specifics of the Bruneau Agreement, there you can Google it on the internet, and there's all kinds of information about it. I think on the Center of Southwest Studies website from Fort Lewis, you can also get an exact copy of the original agreement. I'm not going to go into all of the details, but of course, Felix Bruneau was pushing this as a purchase of this land. The Utes were supposed to receive an annual payment for the land in perpetuity and other remuneration, but none of that really ever happened. But I'm going to just mention a few things from the newspapers of the time, because this gives you a feeling of what was going on sort of in the country. This was all covered very closely by leading newspapers in Colorado, such as the Rocky Mountain News. One of the headlines on September the 3rd, 1873, was that Mr. Bruneau and the Indian Commission, Honorable Felix R. Bruneau of Pittsburgh, chairman, and Thomas K. Cree of Washington, secretary of the Board of Indian Commissioners, arrived at the American House last evening, and from Montana Territory, where they have been holding a protracted council with the Crow Indians. And then they're coming here to Colorado to negotiate with the Utes. So his movements were covered by the newspapers because, again, a lot financially was hanging on this. The mining people wanted to have access to the San Juans, and the Utes were an impediment. On September the 24th of 1873, the Rocky Mountain News announced that a treaty was made. Title to the San Juan country is relinquished. The Utes agree to cede. What Mr. Bruneau did at the Los Pinos Agency. That's where negotiations were held. 4 million acres have been acquired. The mining country now is public domain. Good news for the miners. So anyway, that's how the newspapers sort of covered this. Again, on September the 30th of 1873, it listed some of the particulars of the Bruneau Agreement. They were supposed to get an annual annuity of $25,000 annually forever in perpetuity. And they were supposed to receive an interest of $500,000 and so forth. So again, if you want the particulars of the Bruneau Agreement, there's a lot about it on the internet. On January the 14th of 1877, this is way ahead, then there starts to be problems. And again, that's for another webinar. So let's go to the next slide. So in January 1874, the territorial legislature meets in Denver. The appointed governor is Samuel Elbert. And because of the Bruneau Agreement, they realized that it's time to create some new counties. And so by an act on January or February the 10th, 1874, 3 new counties were created in western Colorado. And this map shows the outlines of the new counties. Conejos County was subdivided and became a smaller county. It was the pre-existing county. The new counties became Rio Grande County, which included Del Norte, Hinsdale County on the Rio Grande, further west and north, and then La Plata County on the western side of the divide, running all the way to the Utah border and south to New Mexico. So anyway, right about this same time, Governor Elbert, who was appointed by the president, it's announced that he's going to be replaced. President Grant was sort of wishy-washy, and he decides to remove Elbert from office and replace him with another person. Well, Elbert was pretty popular, and so before Elbert leaves office, he appoints the county commissioners and other county officers for these newly created counties. And they would hold those offices until the first election in each of those counties. And then it would be up to the voters to pick their replacements or to retain them. Well, Elbert, the first commissioners that he picks for La Plata County is a man by the name of Osborne, Wilson, and Dempsey Reese. And if you know anything about Silverton's history, Dempsey Reese becomes an important character in the development of Silverton, and eventually they name a street after him. But the controversy came when Grant replaces Governor Elbert, Samuel Elbert, with Edward M. McCook. Edward M. McCook was unpopular with the Ute people, and he was unpopular with prospectors. He had a bad reputation. So everybody here in southwestern Colorado was very upset about this appointment of McCook. So again, that's a whole another story. Well, because there's a new county, they had to pick a county seat. And so let's go to the next slide. So right there is a log structure which became La Plata County's first courthouse, and this was located at Howardsville. And Howardsville gets sort of selected as the county seat, and the county reaches an agreement with a man by the name of Burrow to supply them with a structure for county offices and for the county court. This building that we see pictured here was not standing when the county was created. And the first building that was occupied by the county was a much smaller log structure that they rented from Mr. Burrow. But they entered an agreement with him to build a more substantial building that would be suitable for court purposes. And so they specified that the walls of the building had to be much taller than the existing building that they were in, to reflect the nature of the court. And so this building that you see was built by Mr. Burrow for the La Plata County government, and was used for the first courthouse. This picture, of course, was taken years and years later, after the Silverton Northern Railroad was built, and those railroad tracks there were tracks of the Silverton Northern Railroad on its way to Animas Forks. This building survived up until 1954. It was basically a ruin in 1954, and someone burned what remained of it. But for many years, there was a plaque on the outside of the building that designated it as the first courthouse in La Plata County. Anyway, most of the mining activity was going on up again in Cunningham Gulch and Arasta Gulch. And so this was a practical place for them to have the county offices. Let's go to the next slide. So they have an election. The first county election was in the fall of 1874. And again, during the summer of 1874, the different political parties held conventions to choose candidates for the upcoming election. This picture that we see is dated 1874, and it's an oil painting that was done by Emil Fisher, and it depicts his version of Baker's Park, which then became known as Silverton. And the cabin that is shown there is Snowden's cabin. Snowden was one of the first people to build a structure in what became known as Silverton. And the Snowden cabin was one of the polling places in the election of 1874. Now, again, they picked candidates who were not necessarily the same people who were appointed by the governor when the county was instituted. And again, an election was held in September of 1874. They had to designate polling places, and the polling places for La Plata County were, of course, Howardsville, which was a county seat at the time, and Eureka, another nearby mining camp on the Animas River, and a place called Forks of the Animas. In other words, today we refer to it as Animas Forks, and Silverton, which was a brand new town. And the westernmost precinct was Parrott City. There was another precinct that was supposed to be over on the Dolores River, but there wasn't anybody over there. So the only polling places where you could actually cast a vote, again, were Silverton, Howardsville, Eureka, Animas Forks, Hermosa, and Parrott City. And so one of the big questions was where the permanent county seat was going to be. After this election, the nominated locations were Silverton, Bullion City, Howardsville, Eureka, Picayune Gulch, or Baker's Park. So anyway, where the votes fell were that Silverton becomes the county seat in the fall of 1874. There were no votes, or very few votes, for many of these other locations, but there were only about 338 ballots cast in that election over the whole county, and Silverton received 183 votes to be the county seat. Again, back in the early days, prior to this election, one of the first county commissioners for Western La Plata County who was appointed was Mr. Fleming, who was one of those first prospectors who made the discovery of the Comstock over on the La Plata River. The county commissioners that were elected in 1874 were Thomas Tripp, who you'll hear that name later when Hermosa is developed. There was a Richard J. Carley. He was District 1. Thomas Tripp was District 2. And Alexander K. Fleming became the county commissioner for the third district, which was Western La Plata County. In other words, the area of Parrott City and everything west to the Utah line. So anyway, I think we're going to stop at that point. And but this picture of Baker's Park, or what became Silverton there with the Snowden cabin, if you examine it closely, it's very hilarious. There's obviously some partying going on. There's a guy laying out by the side of the cabin who looks passed out. There's another guy standing over him who looks like he's had a little too much to drink and may be having a little vomiting episode. There's other people guzzling out of bottles, and there's this line of folks coming in. We're not sure what event this was that Emil Johnson or Emil Fisher was trying to capture, but it's really pretty funny. And this large oil painting can be seen in the museum, the San Juan County Historical Museum in Silverton. This painting was originally done, it's very large, and it hung in the Masonic Lodge building in Silverton. That's what it was painted for. When the Masonic Lodge disbanded, the painting ended up at the Historical Society. But it is sort of funny, and I don't know if it's just Emil Fisher's sense of humor or what he was trying to depict here, but it's an interesting depiction of early Silverton. So we're going to cut it off at that point, and we're going to open it up to questions. Anybody got any questions?
I'll say this is a very complicated story, and we've kind of gone at a very high level, but it's kind of fascinating what happened and all the pieces that went into it. We couldn't have done it without Alan Nosseman's incredible Many More Mountains. The volume 1 was our go-to place. If you want to learn more about county history, that's the place to go. We also used Eric Twitty's Basins of Silver, which is a history from a mining perspective, which is absolutely fascinating. And another very interesting reference we used was Frank Hall's 1895 History of Colorado. It was certainly a different perspective, shall we say, than the present. So I'm checking any questions. If you're on Zoom, go ahead and either raise your hand or type them in. Or if you think of something, send us an email at info@animusmuseum.org. And I'm not seeing any questions. So let me do some quick, shameless self-promotion, and then we'll head downstairs and answer questions in person. Today we're talking about the 150th anniversary of La Plata County. Well, here at the Animus Museum, we're part of the local organizing committee working on the sesquicentennial. Now say that 5 times fast. What that means is 2026 is going to mark the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and Colorado will mark the 150th anniversary of statehood. And the establishment of La Plata County is one of the first milestones leading up to that. So if you're interested in learning more about what the committee is doing in preparations for 2026, we did have a meeting this week, but you can sign up for our newsletter at animusmuseum.org/A250-C150, and we'll post that link in the recording. This month is also Black History Month, and on Saturday, February 24th, we're going to have a special members-only event where we're going to premiere a video of the Buffalo Soldiers event that we held back in September. So if you missed that opportunity, the premiere will be at the museum at 1 o'clock on that Saturday, but it's for members only. If you're not a member, you got 2 weeks to join, and you can either join online, or if you're in the audience, we've got forms you can fill out and become a member. It'll be a really special event. The video, it looks like it's shaping up absolutely beautifully. It will be posted later on our YouTube channel with social media and all that other links from our website. But to get first dibs on it, join us and come see it at the museum. Next month, and how can it be March already? But it is Women's History Month, and we're going to tell some of the stories of the women who were the first in what we now call La Plata County on our second Saturday series webinar. As of now, this is on Zoom only, but that and with a showing on the big screen, but and you can sign up on our website. That might change. We'll see how that goes, but the date is March 8th, and the time is, as usual, 1 p.m. One last scan for questions, and don't see any. So finally, to keep up with us, join us. Members get access to our online catalog database and special events like the premiere of the Buffalo Soldiers event. And you can sign up on our website. You can visit our website for more resources, subscribe to our e-blast, follow us on Facebook, like us on Instagram. And if you would like to see continued programming like this, be sure to hit the donate button on our website. We appreciate your support and thank you for joining us today. Happy birthday, La Plata County.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.